Benedicte, my friends, and welcome to the Time Traveler's Tavern, where we share a maze or two of mead with witty, intelligent humor to bring light to the Dark Ages and revelry to the Renaissance. I'm your host, Sister Mary Margaret Mead Hall. My dear friends, welcome to the Time Traveler's Tavern. I hope you're all enjoying the cooler weather. I especially enjoy this time of year. Most of the harvest is complete, and we can return to making cider and starting our wines or meads. These are some of the most pleasant ways to preserve the harvest. Of course, in addition to putting food by for the long, cold winters. I've started a lovely little batch of open fermented mead for a quick mead challenge. I harvested wild yeast from picking a few crab apples and letting them set with some unprocessed honey and water and nurtured that through. I like to think of it as my little yeast farm. I've been brewing these open ferments in a clay cooking pot. And I also took a branch off an apple tree to make my stir stick. I took the bark off and made some notches in it. And when I use that to stir when I aerate the mead, take the lid off and let it breathe a little bit. It holds the yeast so I can preserve it from one batch to the next. And that'll give the fresh caught wild yeast a head start. I do need to brew more. Something I honestly really enjoy. Let me know in the comments if you've been doing any brewing this year or what you've brewed in years past. I'd love to hear more on that and love to talk about it.
Hey, lady, are you married, Meadhole?
Yes, and that's sister.
Oh, but I don't have a sister.
Never mind. What can I do for you?
I got a letter here for you.
Oh, good. It must be from my dear friend, the traveling anchoress.
The lady who gets towed around in a tower?
Yeah, that's her. By the way, my child, do you know you have a tiller sticking out of the front of your pants?
Ah, I know. It's driving me nuts.
Oh, why did I ask that?
Going for the letter, lady.
Okay, hold on. There you go. Don't spend it all in one place. And it's sister.
I told you, I don't have a sister.
Probably a good thing. And you don't have to bite the coin like that. It's good, I swear.
Right. Bye, lady.
Good help is so hard to find. And now on to the letter. To my dear sister in Pod, greetings. We do continue on our journey to Ireland, to the Abbey at Kells, having found our visit to France to consult with Christine de Pizan most informative. Her writings do illuminate the many and varied contributions of ladies in this weary world, which are oft overlooked by such men as the Ménagier de Paris, whose book's sole focus is the proper way to complete household tasks, as though his child bride had no mother to instruct her in those arts. We marvel at the need for men to pontificate long and loud on a woman's proper sphere. And recognizing that the Almighty has gifted us with both wombs and brains, and the capacity to use both with right good skill. That being sadly as it is, and unlikely to change, though I shall indeed continue to beseech the Almighty that the sons of Adam learn to value the gifts that they received from his hands when he created Eve, remembering that she was created from his side as a partner and not from under his foot as a slave. Somebody's feeling feisty on that ship, aren't they? Let me share with you a most wondrous receipt for mulled wine, given to me in Normandy, where they do indeed grow fine apples. As the holy season swift approaches, and we look to such festive food and drink as we may offer to our guests, this cider is an excellent way to test seasonings for the holiday mulled wine, to best judge their freshness and flavor. Take you 2 quarts of good sweet cider, and add in such spices as seemed best. I do favor the use of 2 cinnamon sticks, 4 to 6 whole cloves, whole nutmeg cracked, that's really pricey, and 4 allspice berries when such can be found. Use not ground spice in this drink, for it doth make for a cloudiness and grainy texture. You may warm or toast the spices a bit before adding them to the cider to open the flavors to better season your drink. Warm the cider and seasonings gently and stir in a thin sliced lemon or orange. Taste and sweeten with honey if desired. You may serve this as it stands or add a touch of brandy. Calvados or applejack is good to ward against the autumn chill. We do grieve that our last messenger did so far forget his manners as to snap at your fingers when you did kindly offer sustenance after his journey. That being so, I beg the kindness of the cabin boy, who agreed to send this missive to you by a kinsman. We pray it finds you well recovered. Your loving sister in pod, the traveling anchoress. Well, it looked like the cabin boy decided to deliver it all on his own. He's a big boy now. I have a truly fun discussion for you tonight at the tavern. We're going to talk about Elizabethan embroidery with the enthusiastic and all too humble about her incredible embroidery pieces, Liz Scott, known in the SCA as Mistress Elizabeth de Belcaire. Her enthusiasm is so contagious that I have absolutely no skill with the needles, but I was ready to run out and take embroidery classes because she made it sound so appealing. She does have more patience than I will ever have in my life. Welcome to the tavern. I'm so grateful to have you here. You are quite the expert in Elizabethan embroidery.
I consider myself a perennial student more than an expert, but I do have some knowledge of Tudor and Elizabethan and Jacobean embroidery.
Wow. What started your interest in this? How did you get into that specific age of embroidery?
I took a class at a West Kingdom A&S event from a longtime embroidery laurel of the West named Isela Duberry, who has remained one of my embroidery friends and mentors. And the class was called Fruits and Flowers, which is an iconic style of Elizabethan and Jacobean embroidery. They liked to do embroidery of basically of their gardens.
Oh, so they're like specific themes for the embroidery that was done?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yes. And the theme was, walk out into your garden and see what you see and then stitch it.
Cool. So what other themes were there? Or was it mostly just centered around the garden plants and
the Tudors in England was absolutely a flourishing of embroidery in all sorts of different themes. The natural world was a huge theme, so garden embroideries were very big, but they did other things too. Actually, like classical Greek myths were a theme.
oh.
Biblical scenes were a theme, although that got a little weird with England versus the continent because of the religious rift that happened during the Tudor era.
Oh, good point.
But yeah, so you actually in the 16th century, you still had a lot of Catholic embroidery for the church on the continent, but you very much did not have that after Henry VIII in England.
I would have thought of that. When you said about religious embroidery, it's like, wait a second, were like Catholic embroideries destroyed during this period when the Church of England came about?
Yep, I've been studying this period and doing embroidery based in this period for mumble, I don't know, 25-ish years now. So
that's fantastic. Do you have a favorite like year in the time period? In this, because that's a broad range from Tudor to Jacobean.
It is. I tend more towards the latter part of the Tudor era. I'm more interested in the Elizabethan and the late Elizabethan at this point into the Jacobean, which is where you get a very specific style where you get a lot of gold work and a lot of a very specific style of gold work that interestingly, that at least as far as my research has taken me, was only done in England.
Was it of the same motifs as you mentioned earlier, like the naturalistic or?
A lot of natural motifs, yes. Although a lot of the sort of swooping gold was what would be was the vines that were done and sort of the framing around flowers and fruit and insects. Around all of these natural motifs, you had these big swoops of gold. And if you actually look at some of the portraits of the latter part of Elizabeth's reign, both of Elizabeth herself and of highborn ladies. You see these swooping gold, sort of viney looking things with flowers in the middle of the swoop. And then you can go to, say, the website of the V&A in England and see extant pieces that echo the portraiture. It is amazing. And oh, they have high-res pictures. The difference in the SCA between when I started doing this embroidery and now, the research capabilities that have been brought about by the internet and the increase in bandwidth so we can get high-res photos from museums, is astonishing.
You seem like someone that's going to be blowing up the pictures just to count stitches.
Yep,
Head on.
I have actually done that.
Who would have been making these embroideries? Is this something that is reserved? Well, I guess if you're using gold thread, this was reserved for the upper classes.
Well, it was in theory reserved for the upper classes, but the Elizabethan era, the Tudor era as a whole, but really as Elizabeth's reign took off in the 1560s, we saw the rise of the merchant class. There were, of course, sumptuary laws that were broken as regularly as speeding laws in our era.
That makes sense with the rising merchant class
who,
just speeding by all the laws. That's a great analogy, actually.
It actually is. Yeah, if they could afford it, they bought it. You had to have money to get the gold thread embroideries. Embroidery was done by anyone who could, although the extant pieces of it that we have tend to be the fancy ones.
That makes sense.
They were what got kept over the years.
I'm going to jump back here. How would they make gold thread at this time in history?
They had been making gold thread from way before this time. The earliest extant example of Western European embroidery that incorporates gold thread is from the 9th century.
9th century? Oh, my word.
9th century. It is a piece called and I cannot pronounce this worth a darn, Mosaic, Maaseik embroidery. It is dated to about the 9th century. It's currently held in Belgium. And it has an example of what we call gold passing thread, which would be a strand of silk that is then wrapped by a very thin piece of gold foil in a spiral. Oh. That is a type of thread that is still available today.
Oh, my word. Was it part of an ecclesiastical garment? I mean, what would have been that special to
the piece?
Sorry.
It was, we don't know. Oh, cool. It was incorporated into an ecclesiastical piece, into a chasuble, I believe. But this piece, actually, this embroidery was not the whole garment. It was something that had been probably made possibly centuries earlier that was then incorporated into the garment. And that's something we see over and over.
If you're putting so much effort into the embroidery and all the details, you're not going to just waste it by tossing it aside when the garment wears out. You're going to cut it off and put it on something else.
Absolutely. And not just effort, money. I mean, this was real gold we're talking about, and silk that somehow made it to Western Europe from Asia in the 9th century.
That's boggling to me. I think trade routes were really larger, more extensive than anyone's really thought.
There are examples of silk embroidery in ancient Egypt. How'd the silk get there? We don't know, but silkworms don't grow in Egypt. So they got there from Asia.
The world is a smaller place even before the internet. That's incredible.
It's astonishing. That's one of the things that I learned about when I started really getting into the history of embroidery. That was one of the most astonishing things to me, is how far some of this traveled. Even the Mosaic embroidery, they don't know for sure. It's very hard because none of this stuff got signed. Mm-hmm. None of this stuff has documentation with it. They think it somehow got to the Low Countries, so Belgium, the Netherlands. They think it was Anglo-Saxon in origin, so it somehow got there from the British Isles.
How would the Anglo-Saxons have had, never mind,
gold thread and gold and silk threads?
Yeah.
We don't know. That's a really fascinating question. And there's still so much out there to discover. I took a course in medieval goldwork just about, a year and a half ago from a professor of archaeology who lives in Germany.
Incredible.
was a Zoom course. She is working like today with churches that have pieces of medieval embroidery, bundled up in their storerooms that have never been looked at, much less studied in the modern age.
Oh, my word.
If I were independently wealthy, I know what I would want to do.
I keep apologizing to my family for being born good looking instead of rich. So, yes, I understand.
To be born independently wealthy, oh, I would be over there, yeah, plundering church basements.
Wouldn't be the first time in history that happened. But
No, actually, it would be very traditional,
so,
very medieval.
experimental archaeology, let's go plunder church basements.
Oh, that would be so
I
awesome.
wonder how they'd react. Anyway, have you studied the extant pieces in Europe?
Yes, I have. I haven't been back to Europe since COVID. Last time I went to Great Britain, I was actually able, by emailing the curators, to get into the conservation room at the Burrell collection in Glasgow.
Oh my gosh.
And they have a stunning collection, just in their galleries of the kind of embroidery, the Tudor embroidery, the fruits and flowers. Their collection is amazing, and I was just there for hours.
And you got behind the scenes.
They have some, and then I got to go. Yeah, then I actually did get to go behind the scenes, and because they don't have a study center, so the curator just took me up into the conservation room, and I got to watch conservators conserving.
Oh my word.
Yeah, one of the things that just absolutely floored me is there was a woman working on a bed hanging that had been rolled up in their basement. And anyone who does embroidery conservation hears rolled up and automatically cringes. I was able to see her working on it, and it was H's and A's entwined. They think it is an embroidered bed hanging that was Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn,
yes.
somehow
oh my gosh.
survived.
That's where my head went.
And it somehow survived the purge because most of those things were burned.
Right. He totally tried to wipe her out.
You're right. And that's exactly what he tried to erase her. And somehow this thing survived and was probably from that era.
That's incredible. Have you been following progress on that piece?
I have not, and I really should go back. They had actually, the Burrell collection had closed for a couple of years, right? I was actually very lucky to get to visit it when I did. Closed for remodeling.
Okay.
And just reopened a year or two ago.
Oh, cool. How are you spelling that so we know what collection to look for?
Oh, Burrell, I believe.
In Glasgow.
In Glasgow.
That's specifically Elizabethan or Tudor?
It is a large museum with lots of art, particularly decorative art. But yeah, its collection of Elizabethan and Jacobean embroidery is one of the better ones. And they have great online presence with high-res photos.
I sense a theme here in your interests.
Yes. Well, living on the west coast of the United States and having to work for a living, I don't get over to Europe and visit in person all that much. And even if I did, there are some things that high-res photos can do for us. It's like being able to take a microscope and look at these things, which is hard to do even if you're behind the scenes. And certainly you're not allowed to do if you're in a gallery at a museum.
That's incredible. Do you have a favorite museum?
Yes,
sorry.
Oh, yes, the V&A. For embroidery, there's nothing like it.
Do they know you by name there as well, or just the...
They do not. I just come and haunt it when I go to London. The piece I did that probably put me over the top for being elevated to the laurel in the SCA was a knife case and pincushion set that's held by the V&A. And I was able to get high-res photos of those. And I believe I did have to write to them to get the high-res photos I needed. But yeah, they had high enough res photos that I was not just counting the stitches, I was counting the threads per inch of the fabric,
oh my word,
of the ground fabric, so that I could reproduce as accurately as possible using modern materials this particular set of items.
How do you source your materials? I mean,
oh boy.
sorry, was that a trick question?
No, that's a big question.
Are you like hammering
I
gold in your
have
basement
been
or something just to get the threads?
actually no. And here's an interesting thing. If I had been an embroiderer in that period, either professional or amateur, I would not have been hammering my own gold. I would have been buying my thread from a merchant. This goes to the whole that rise of the merchant
So it made
class.
it more easily available to source the materials to do. Okay.
Absolutely, it did. Yeah, there were silk merchants and there were gold thread merchants and there were needle merchants and there were fabric merchants. All of these things were more available, and because people were, wealth was spreading, there were more and more opportunities for people to buy these kinds of materials. So honestly, I was been doing it in a modern but period way. I do in fact use the internet. It is the easiest way now. Certainly wasn't when I started in the SCA. When I started in the SCA, there was one merchant within 2 or 3 hours of me, not merchant, but not SCA merchant, but one store within 2 or 3 hours of me that I could go to buy really high quality embroidery materials. However, the proliferation of specialty thread and fabric vendors online has made it so much
25 years ago,
easier.
we didn't have the internet. So yeah, we're just starting out.
We had very bare bones. We didn't have an internet that our kids, nieces, and nephews would recognize as the internet. But one of the things that's happened that has been amazing, for example, I get some really specialty early 17th century materials from a vendor out of the Midwest who, because she has an online following, is able to work with a thread manufacturer in France to have specialty runs made
Oh my word.
of materials that, some of which haven't been made very much since the 17th
Just not
century.
much of a demand. Okay.
Not much of a demand, but now there is. There's a very famous piece called the Plymouth Jacket. It is the jacket itself, I want to say, is held by the V&A, but I'm not positive of that. But about, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, some experiential archaeologists like us decided they wanted to try to recreate it. And so they had to go to the thread manufacturers and say, we want to do this thing. Could you possibly create some materials for us, some specialty threads, some red silk threads loosely wrapped with gold foil so that we can recreate this garment? And the thread manufacturers went, well, okay, if you pay us, sure. They did that, and it's turned out that there's been more interest in it, so they've kept making those materials, and they are now available for purchase.
I've actually seen pictures of the Plymouth Jacket. It's PLI instead of the Y, right?
Yes, correct. That is the kind of embroidery I like to do, by the way.
You have more
I've
patience than
never
I
done
ever
a whole
will.
jacket. I've never done a whole jacket, and that jacket was the reproduction was made by like a team of a dozen or more people.
Yikes.
Again, with that pesky, I have a day job thing. One of the things that was very much something that happened in Tudor era was a lot of those big items were made by professional shops. Queen Elizabeth had a master embroiderer on the payroll. We have receipts, we have ledgers that say that. We have his name, which I have of course forgotten.
Was this mostly male?
Both men and women did this professionally, actually.
That's great.
We don't know everybody, but there's evidence of both men and women being professional embroiderers. Actually, we have woodcuts and paintings occasionally of women in what are clearly embroidery shops.
Now, were they all making their own patterns for these, or was somebody actually supplying the patterns as well?
Oftentimes, someone was supplying the patterns. If it was something really fancy, like if it was something, like I mentioned earlier, like a Greek mythological motif, you probably got an actual artist to draw for you and create what would be called prick and then pounce onto your fabric.
That's wild.
Uh, on the other hand, we're in a post Gutenberg world in the 16th century, and pattern books started to be published. So home embroiderers could buy a pattern book and they could just open to a page, prick the pattern, and then smoosh the page down on grind chalk through it or grind charcoal through it and connect the dots. And that's called pricking and pouncing and painting. And they could use commercially available patterns.
I'm very naive on this. You mentioned a very curious phrase, I believe, prick and pounce. That sounds like my cat.
Yeah, mine too.
Can you talk us through that process? How would embroidery have been made or put onto a garment, or do you put it on something else first? How does this work?
Yes, the phrase prick and pounce is what's used to describe how patterns or how drawings were transferred from paper or vellum onto fabric. Interestingly, this is also the process that was used to transfer initial line drawings from paper or vellum onto canvas or board for medieval and Renaissance paint artists.
Oh, they wouldn't just sketch right onto the...
Nope.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
And we'll get to that in a sec. But yeah, it's actually kind of fascinating because, yes, I really am this big of a geek.
Oh, this is wonderful.
So what happened? So what was done in either case is you get someone who was a skilled artist, would do a drawing on, we don't have many of the, I don't know if we have any original, pieces of paper or pieces of vellum or whatever they use to do their initial drawing, ink drawings on. But they did. We know this. Say I wanted swooping vines with carnations and roses and butterflies and snails for a coif. And I was very rich and could get an artist to draw it for me so that, all the vines were exactly the same width.
They swooped in the same manner.
They all swooped in the same manner and everything was perfect and beautiful.
You really your swooping vines. I love it. Go ahead.
I do. I like a good swooping vine.
This is a family show. Remember that. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. The artist does this drawing. So I have my nice drawing. So the first thing I do is I take a fairly fat pinner needle, and I prick. I use it, and I put my drawing down on something that has some give to it, in possibly felt. Felt's a good thing. In my modern world, I often use the kind of little foam sheets you can get at a craft store. So you put that down on your surface, you take your kind of fat pinner needle, and you prick along the lines of your drawing. And you do that about quarter inch, half inch interval. So now your drawing has all these tiny little holes in it.
Which makes perfect sense. So you're not doing it on a good, freshly woven piece of fabric. You have another medium to put that
on.
Good.
No, because, this allows the artist can make mistakes and then fix them. So you have your perfect drawing. So you do this prick, and that's the part that's called pricking. The next thing you do is called pouncing. The actual word pounce in this context means a very fine powder that you're going to grind through the pricked holes in your drawing. Depending on the color of the fabric you're going to use, that'll either be charcoal or it will be chalk.
So it's the same as like a tailor's chalk?
Yes. Well, actually, it's a little bit more like a gymnast's chalk.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's
loose chalk. Yeah, it has to be pretty fine chalk, and it needs to be loose. I put mine in a little, ramekin dish, and then I use a tool. I'm super high-tech with my tool for doing this process. I roll up a piece of craft felt and put a little hot glue on. So I have a little about inch and a half in diameter piece of tightly rolled craft felt. And the end of it is now this sort of blunt tool made out of felt. And because it's felt, it will grip powder. So I stick it in my dish of powder. I pick it up, I shake it off a little so it doesn't get absolutely everywhere. And then I take my nice pricked drawing, I put it down on the fabric I'm going to embroider on. I stick pins in that so that the pricked drawing doesn't move, because you don't want it to move or you will end up with, yeah, that would be bad. So it needs to stay nice and still. But once my drawing is pinned to my fabric, I take my tool with the powder on it and I grind all over the drawing where the pricked holes are. And I do that until I've got all of the holes have powder ground through them onto my ground fabric. Then I very, very carefully remove the pins from my drawing, and very, very slowly and gently I lift the drawing off my fabric.
Is this something you get one chance at doing, and if you mess it up, you can't like put the paper back and redo it?
Oh, you can totally redo it. You just have to brush all of the powder off and reset everything and do it again, and that gets boring fast.
That sounds so stressful to me.
I'm making it sound harder than it is.
Again, you have more patience than I ever will. So
yeah, embroidery as a whole takes patience. It's a very it's the slowest start. So, but we're not done yet. Oh, trust me. But wait, there's more. So I have very carefully pulled my drawing off and set it aside. And now I have a piece of fabric with all these little dots, chalk or powder dots on it. And if I've done it right, what I have essentially is a connect the dots drawing.
Perfect.
Like, to do it truly properly, I would take a very fine paintbrush, and probably India ink is what they used in the Tudor period. And we know that because we have some half embroidered pieces that were never finished. So we still see the India ink.
Oh, wow.
And what you do is you take your brush and your India ink and you connect the dots. So you do a connect the dots painting that ends up looking exactly like the drawing.
Okay. So it's
no actual art skill is required to do this because it is literally a connect the dots.
I honestly thought most of this was just like freehand and people were just sitting there like they're all wicked talented. And
that was something that I discovered as I learned about this. It was lovely to discover this.
I believe it.
I don't have to be good at drawing. Drawing and embroidery are two skills. And in the SCA period, this was known and they specialized.
That is incredible.
So yeah, in modern day, I do not do the paintbrush and India ink thing. I cheat. I use gel pens.
The equivalent.
Gel pen. Yes, gel pens are great. They don't bleed. Yeah, you don't want to use the kind of pens that bleed because you'll end up with big fat lines on your fabric. That's no fun. Then you have to stitch over it, and that's not always what you want to do. So I use gel pens. They work.
That's great. Would you just do a little section at a time, or would something like the Plymouth jacket be done everything laid out at once, or would it be laid out in little sections and completed? Or
it would be laid out in sections and completed. For a complex design like the Plymouth jacket, it would be done in what I would refer to as layers, and I actually mean layers almost the way Photoshop means layers.
Oh, wow.
Because if you do something, again, something like a mythological scene with people and scenery and all sorts of things, if you try to do that with just one pricking and you pounce it through, you end up with a nightmare mess of dots. There's no pattern to follow. You just have you have mush. Ask me how I know this. I have done it wrong more than once.
That is how you learn.
That's when you, yep, that's when you get to brush off the fabric and try again. Sometimes you have your artist does your beautiful drawing, or in my case, I trace something out of a book or something off the internet and then trace that. Sometimes I'm going to trace it for up to 4 or 5 times and prick different parts of it.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Lay it down and do the pounce it through and then draw in layers until I have the whole design done.
I think the Photoshop analogy was perfect because I could just picture how that's done. That's a great visual
Yeah,
for that.
it's a good order of operations. I think it's really interesting how much, the way we do things and think of things in the modern world, it has been done before. It will be done again.
Hmm. We had a previous episode of medieval medicine, and
Oh, yeah.
my friend giving his demonstration of an amputation at a Renaissance fair.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so cool.
The episode was hilarious because blood spurting, EMTs were called, and he's like, "It's my show, leave," basically. He had a doc come up to him afterward and say, we do this basically the same way you just showed us, which is
I am not at,
fascinating and
yeah, I'm not
terrifying.
that surprised by that. The technology may differ, but a lot of the concepts are very much the same.
That's fascinating.
No, people who were master embroiderers were not master artists, drawing artists.
That is fascinating. One of the things that struck me, especially with all eyes being on the nobility, so many messages to convey power were shown on their clothes.
Oh, yes.
You mentioned sumptuary laws. So many things were done to project an image. Was embroidery also used in that manner?
Oh, yes, hugely so. I've described it as in the period that I studied the most, but in other periods I've done at least some study of as well. It was embroidery on your clothing, on your furnishings, hanging on your wall, on your shoes. It displayed power and wealth. And the more of it you had, the different materials you used, it conveyed your status in society. It conveyed who your family was. Obviously, it was used to convey messages about royalty. If you watch documentaries, if you read books, if you study portraits at all, you see the royalty displaying these things. There's a set of surviving falconry gear. We're thought to belong to Henry VIII at his royal household that have gold embroidery on them. And how much money and status do you have to be able to put gold threaded embroidery on your bird?
That is awesome. Just I never thought about extant falconry hoods and jesses and stuff.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more from the 16th century than there is from the 12th century because it's literally twice as long ago to get to the 12th century. So there's much more from the 16th century, but yes, there is extant falconry gear in museums in Europe.
That's amazing. So to go back to the symbolism, it sounds like projecting the wealth and the power wasn't just in the materials, but also in the images chosen.
Yes, absolutely. If you look at some portraits of Queen Elizabeth, there are motifs on her clothing that are portraying very specific symbolism. There are obelisks, there are eyes, the different flowers had meanings. Most of what we know about the language of flowers today comes from the Victorians, but not all of it.
Oh, cool.
We have some from...
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Shakespeare.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, Shakespeare.
Yeah, actually, Ophelia's soliloquy in Hamlet goes there very directly.
Nice.
It's fun to chatting about it. And of course, actually, the roses, the red roses and the white roses from the War of the Roses.
From New York. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that then sort of combined and became the Tudor
rose.
Yes. The flowers, or one of my jokes is that if it didn't actually get up and run away, someone in the Tudor era would stitch a flower on it, no matter what it was.
Funny.
They embroidered all over everything.
So it wasn't just clothing. You said furnishings, you said shoes, you said like
Everything you see in the portraiture, actually, there are some. We have actually been able to match up Tudor portraits with extant garments,
oh, that's exciting.
which is super cool. And that leading to the discovery of the Bacton altar cloth, which it turns out is a piece of 16th century cloth of silver with embroidery all over it that appears to match the skirt of the rainbow portrait of Queen Elizabeth.
Oh my word.
First piece of one of Elizabeth's dresses that's ever been
Oh my
found.
gosh.
But we've had accessories that were thought to or known to belong to her. But the Bacton altar cloth was only found, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago.
Wait, we don't have any extant Queen Elizabeth gowns?
Not a blessed one. One skirt, we think now.
Oh my gosh.
First one. It's astonishing. Yeah, we have had none of Queen Elizabeth's gowns of the hundreds she
Oh my
owned.
God. I just think that obviously the gown from the Armada portrait is somewhere in a gallery.
Nope.
Holy crow, that's amazing.
Actually, part of why we think the Bacton altar cloth was possibly part of the gown from the rainbow portrait is it was found in the parish church in Bacton that was the parish church of one of Elizabeth's favored ladies in waiting.
And that's how the gown found its way there, possibly.
Yes. At this point, there's no documentation, but what they think happened is probably the gown was gifted to the lady in waiting, possibly posthumously, and the lady in waiting donated it to her church, local parish church.
It all comes back to the church basement.
Yeah, and it had been cut up and used as an altar cloth for many years. Somebody at some point realized it was valuable, and so stuck it behind glass and put it on a wall. Less than 10 years ago, somebody at the church was looking at this thing that was on the church wall and said, that looks like it might be something special. And so called in someone from the British Museum to have a look at it.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. And since then, it's been conserved and it's in the process of being studied.
That is amazing. I love stories like that.
It's so cool. I remember when that broke on the internet that they'd found that, for me and my fellow embroidery geeks, it was all we could talk about for weeks.
That is so cool. For folks that want to take a deeper dive on this, do you have three top favorite resources, books, websites, whatever you could recommend?
Absolutely. One we've already discussed, which is the V&A, which stands for Victoria and Albert Museum website. The museum, if you can get over to London, they also have a study center where they have a lot of their embroidery now. You would need to write to them to go study embroidery pieces at the study center. But a lot of museums worldwide, you don't have to be a scholar, you don't have to be in academia, you don't have to be a professional anything. A lot of them are very willing to work with anybody who shows an interest. The worst they can say is no. I recommend if you're on your way to anywhere, Europe, Washington, D.C., the Met in New York, write to them, see if they write back. You might get a time to go look at something really cool behind the scenes.
And they'll just let folks that have a geeky interest, a nerdy interest in this. That's
Yes,
wonderful.
absolutely. Another good resource, and this is not a cheap resource, so I would say Interlibrary Alone is Your Friend, is the book Queen Elizabeth's Wardrobe Unlocked by Janet Arnold.
Yep.
It has a lot of the clothing, but it also has, especially towards the end of the book, a lot of information about the embellishment of the clothing.
Oh, nice.
Which is the embroidery. Ditto for Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 4. That's the one that's about the underwear.
Oh, cool. I'm not familiar with that one.
And for people who are into the Janet Arnold universe, the Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion books are being reissued with new photos.
Oh, my word.
and new patterns. So now is a good time to look for those even. So the third thing I would say as a resource for Elizabethan embroidery, I'm going to say there's a book called Elizabethan Stitches, A Guide to Historic English Needlework by Jackie Carey.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I believe it may be out of print right now, so also not cheap. Although interlibrary loan and the used market are your friends.
Oh, yeah.
And my copy is in pretty rough shape because I use it.
You're not tricking and pouncing on your copy, are you?
No, I am not. She has charted out all the stitches, and she has charted out several dozen stitches in this book. And I use the charts to teach myself how to create complex stitches.
That's fantastic.
She has several other books that are also worth looking at. She has a book called Sweet Bags, which is a fun area of Elizabethan embroidery that scholars can't agree on it at all. What were sweet bags used for?
You're saying sweet bags.
Yes, SWEET bags, BAGS.
Never come across that term.
If you go to the Burrell collection, they should have some on display. And the thing is, they're called sweet bags. We have records of them being called sweet bags in period, and no one knows exactly what they were used for. Some people think they were used to hold herbs. Some people think they were used to hold money. Some people think they were used to hold small, like little miniature prayer books. Some people think something else entirely. And you get 5 scholars in this area, 9 opinions.
Please, that sounds like the SCA.
It's kind of hilarious to read about it.
That's really cool.
For some reason, lots of them were very fancy and they got saved. So we have a lot of them and no real good idea of why they existed.
What an awesome project.
I know, right? That would be another, if I had all the money in the world, I would try to figure that out.
That is so cool. Thank you so much for joining us in the tavern and sharing your knowledge. Oh my gosh.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for letting me babble endlessly.
Could I talk you into coming back? Really incredible.
Absolutely.
You're so excited and your excitement is contagious.
I'm so glad. Yes, I would love to talk more about this. And if there's anything, specific or more specialized in this area that you'd like me to ramble on about at length, I would be happy to do that.
Oh, I have a list going for you.
Excellent. And I love that you're doing this tavern.
Thank you. You are welcome back anytime, my friend.
Well, thank you. And can't wait to hear more. And I hope the tavern patrons enjoy this episode.
I have no doubt they will. What a wonderfully talented person. I'm truly in awe of her skill, just looking at some of the pieces that she's made and hearing all that knowledge. How can you not be inspired listening to this woman? If you have any questions or would like to reach out to Liz directly, feel free to contact her at fighterchick, FIGHTERCHICK, at hotmail.com. I'm also really excited to hear about the additional Janet Arnold books and patterns out. Janet Arnold is a household name here at the tavern. A very special thanks tonight to my talented friend Carl the Oblique, who gave a voice to the cabin boy and is one of the few people I know who owns a concertina. We're really looking forward to a special discussion next month. As the wheel of the year turns and the crisp days shorten, lending extra time to the longer nights, our thoughts begin to turn inward. We stay close to the fire and linger over good food and drinks with our loved ones. Much music and stories are shared this time of year around the fire, especially tales of wonder, mysteries, and of course, ghost stories. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to indulge a bit in this spooky time of year. So for our October Tavern discussion, we'll be talking about medieval and Renaissance beliefs around the supernatural, and yes, there will be ghost stories. So my dear friends, as the Scottish prayer states, from ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night, good Lord deliver us. You won't want to miss this episode, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next month at the tavern. I would also like to take a moment to remind you, dear friends, that merchants love to be paid in the coin of the realm. That's cash. It may be difficult to obtain the connections necessary to use your MasterCard, Lady Visa, Card of New Discoveries, or whatever your choice may be, but merchants will always accept your coin and money that folds. Our inspirational music, Vibrabimus, is used with permission by the amazingly talented Diabolis and Musica, the official minstrels of the Tavern. They offer so much more than the dulcet tones that welcome our guests to the tavern. The travels of the Diabolis Bazaar and Sorry Party have taken them in search of the finest treasures inspired by the Silk Road. Their hand-selected wares include homeless saris ready to be adopted, shimmering silks with shiny shisha mirrors, jewelry and other bling things, and fresh made-to-order Turkish coffee. Look for the Purple Vardo large events near you this summer. If you have the coin, they have the wares. So join us next month at the Tavern to find out where our beloved Anchoress is traveling next, to share a mazer or two of mead with witty, intelligent humor that brings light to the Dark Ages and revelry to the Renaissance, all found at the Time Traveler's Tavern. Like us, review us, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher and never miss an episode.